Welcome everyone to my continuing series for Consequence called The Story Behind the Song, where I take you on a journey through iconic artists, iconic songs, and we always tackle two different songs. And one is always one of the artist's biggest hits. And then I always ask my guest to choose one song from their catalog that they'd like to discuss that is special to them. So Gary Numan, welcome to this Consequence Story Behind the Song episode. Good to see you.
Great, thank you. Good to see you too.
And where am I finding you today?
Los Angeles, top floor of my house. It's the only quiet place I've got in the house, actually.
Okay, gotcha.
Kids at home, dogs, it's chaos downstairs. So I get up here and it's quiet.
By the way, do you record there?
I do have a studio at home, but it's not in the house. I've got a little guest house in the back, and it's split into two. One half is an office, one half is a studio. But it's very basic. It's not, it's very unimpressive when you walk in there. Just one screen and a keyboard. But it's good. It does the job. Yeah,
very cool. Very cool. We'll talk about your new album also, obviously, Intruder, which is a great new album. Sure. That just was released very recently. But today we're going to talk about two songs. And not surprisingly, one of the songs is going to be the story behind Cars from the Pleasure Principle, which was released in 1979, I believe. And then, and that was after your breakthrough, from what I understand, with the band Tubeway Army. And one of my favorite songs of yours is Our Friends Electric, which is a wonderful song. And I may ask you about that one today too, but
sure. Yeah. And
just the evolution from Tubeway Army to then releasing your song under your own name, how that all came to be. But then one of the song that you chose is The Gift from your new album Intruder that I mentioned earlier. And so we'll talk about that one second. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, certainly your music is enduring and you continue to release new songs and new albums and on your journey throughout your career. But one of my favorite series as we were locked down in pandemic was Mindhunter. And there was a great scene where one of your songs, Me, from your Pleasure Principle album was prominently used as part of the storyline, not just in the background. It was like really deeply used. And I thought that was interesting. Were you involved in that process at all for that episode?
No, they decide what they're going to use for it, and then they ask permission effectively. So you got the option to say yes, you're happy with that use or not. Yeah. But I usually am. Yeah.
Well, it was a pretty cool use of it, I thought.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was good.
So first of all, Gary, tell me a little bit about just your journey as a young lad and growing up in the UK, right? Growing up in the UK. And how you first discovered your love of music, how that all came to be.
Well, initially, my mum and dad were sort of big music fans, and would always playing records at home. Yeah. But the first time I was sort of really aware of it was I was very little. I can't remember for sure, maybe 4, 5 years old, and there was a guitar player on the television that we were watching. And I was amazed by that, but it wasn't the music. It was the fact that the guitar was electric. You could plug it in and it had a switch in it and some dials. And I just thought that was the best thing ever. And so my fascination with music wasn't actually music at all. It was the things that made the noise. It was the technology behind it. And I didn't realize then, but that would obviously become quite a fundamental sort of part of it for me in the future, because it was that attracted me to electronic music much later. I hadn't really heard that much electronic music that I liked. Some, but so I bought a few albums here and there, but I hadn't heard anything that had turned me onto it that had made me want to go out and get involved in electronic music. So I stumbled across it. Tubeway Army was a punk band. We got signed up as a 3-piece punk band in 1978 by Beggars Banquet label. And we went to a studio to record our debut album, which should have been our set, 12 songs that we did live, which were all punk songs. Yeah. So we get to the studio, and the same one that I made my demo, actually, that I got the deal with Beggars, strangely enough, because it was really cheap. That was the reason we all went there.
Right.
100 quid a day or something. anyway, so we get there, and I go into the control room while the other two bandmates are unloading the car, putting the gear in, and just to introduce myself, to explain what we were doing. And in the corner of the control room was a mini Moog, this little portable synthesizer. And just like the guitar, I was fascinated by the fact that, it's covered in dials and switches and buttons, and it was just a cool thing. And I love all that. When I was little, my one of the best Christmas presents I ever had was when I was young. My dad made me a control panel. He found loads of old dials and switches in his garage, and he made like this wooden frame, drilled holes in it, and inserted all of these dials and switches. So it didn't do anything. They didn't go anywhere, but you could just flick them and pretend. For it. So I was in the Starship Enterprise. I was
right.
That control panel meant that my imagination could take me anywhere in the universe, and I loved it. So I have this natural sort of, I gravitate to all switches and dials, which is really geeky. Anyway, so there's the mini Moog in the corner, and I said to the man, would you mind if I had a go of that? I've never seen a real one before. And I said, and I've liked some of the things that I've heard, but I've not really heard anything sort of really blew me away with it. And so he plugged it in and turned it on and let me have a go of it. And as luck would have it, whoever had used it the time before had left it set up, because there was no presets. It was all
right.
Had left it set up, and this low-end growling roar. It was just amazing. So I pressed, one finger, and the whole room shook, and it was overwhelming. I couldn't believe anything that powerful in such a little box with one finger. Yeah. And you didn't just hear it, you felt it. It was, so I stayed with it for the next, half an hour or so while they unloaded the gear and set it up. I just played with it. And so by the time that the boys had finished loading, they were pretty grumpy with me because I was supposed to be helping. And I just stayed in the control room with the synthesizer.
Meanwhile, you're evolving.
Yeah, absolutely evolving on the spot. And they come in at the end of it and they said, everything's different. We're not going to do any of the things that we came here to do. This is going to change everything. And so we made...
right then and there.
Yeah. It wasn't quite as dramatic as it sounds. We still have the same songs. Although I did write 2 or 3 more, actually. But we had pretty much the same songs. It was a way we recorded them that was different. So a lot of the guitars were pulled out. The synthesizer was put on. We added new layers. We added sound to change all the intros and the outros because this thing made all these noises that weren't available to me before. So we went back to the record company with a pseudo electro punk album, nothing like what they wanted or expected at all. And that caused problems because it wasn't what they wanted or what they wanted. So we had this massive argument, big argument, actually. And my argument was that, this machine is going to change everything. Music is, when more people find out about this is going to revolutionize the way music is made. And I said, you can make me stay with punk if you want. But for me, punk was always a stepping stone. It was always a way to get a contract, to get a foot in the door. But it wasn't really what I wanted to do long term. It was a means to get in to the business, and they knew that. So I said, look, you can make me stay with punk if you want. But as far as I can see, punk's dying on its feet now. It's had its moment. We're at the tail end of it now. This is the end of 78. It's on its way out. I said, or you can be at the very front end of something brand new. So this is going to change everything. And we have a chance here of being one of the very first people to be involved with it. Not the first, but one of the first, And that was my argument. And we argued backwards and forwards, and it got quite heated at times, as you stood up to each other, and it was all very childish. But I was really passionate about it. I really believed that this was coming. And where I was very naive was I thought that I was kind of the only person that had discovered this way of doing it. And Kraftwerk had done their thing, which had been very electronic and very, I say artificial, I don't mean that in a bad way, but no guitars, no drums, everything was artificial.
Right.
You had the Eno thing, which we'd worked with Bowie and all that very grand low period, which I liked a lot, but it wasn't rock music, But I wasn't the first. There were plenty of other people who had discovered it already. I just hadn't heard of them. So luckily, in a way, that sort of naivety from me made me feel as if I was carrying the banner for this thing, as if I was going to be the one that took it, not realizing I was one of the last people to discover it and find it. Just that it was still a very unknown underground kind of music. Anyway, they let me put the album out. It came out. It didn't do too badly. They let me make another one. I'd already written the next one, I think, before the first one came out. I was massively prolific then. The next one came out a few months later, and that had Half Inch Electric on it. That went to number one, and the album went to number one. And then,
so the first one you were under the moniker Two Boy Army at that time, right? And so even when you were still punkish and evolving into that electronic sound, was that Two Boy Army, or was it it was? Okay.
Two Boy Army was signed as a punk band.
Yeah, I see.
But the first album it put out was actually an electronic album. It put out another electronic album. It was Two Boy Army. When I found electronic music, when I found the synthesizer and went back with that album, I said to Beggars Banquet then, I don't want this to be a Two Boy Army album. It's slightly mistaken to think of Two Boy Army as a band. That's the first thing. It was just it was just a different name for me.
Oh, okay. No,
that sounds arrogant, but
no, but that's important.
I don't quite mean it that way. Whoever was in the band would come and go.
I see.
I was the one, and things would just come and go around me. So I didn't want the album to go out as a Two Boy Army album because I associated Two Boy Army as a punk band. I thought punk was failing. I didn't want that connection between Two Boy Army and punk as it faded away. Even though what we were now doing was something very different. I wanted to make a clear cut. The record company didn't want to, so that album went out as Two Boy Army. The next one went out as Two Boy Army. Because that one went to number one, now I've got a little bit more say in what's going on. I got a little bit more sort of strength to my elbow, so to speak.
Right.
And so from then on, it went out as Gary Numan. But then it looked like I'd made a power grab. We had this big number one thing, and then it looked as if I just discarded the band and gone off on my own. And it wasn't like that. And it's always bothered me that it was seen that way back then.
Interesting. So when you changed, you transformed the identity, although it was you, but the identity from Two Boy Army to Gary Numan, that was a conscious decision to break away from the past. Was it also establishing a new persona for yourself that fit the music and your vision for your music?
It wasn't really. No, the persona was already there as far as being Gary Numan is concerned, and the image side of what we did and the way that you presented it and how image was an important part of that. That was already fully established, certainly on the second album, the Replicas album, which I Inch Electric came from. No, I wanted to be out of it before that. I wanted to be out of it. As soon as it went electronic, I didn't want it to be associated with a punk band. But, it didn't do any harm.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you were talking about how you were always very attracted to gizmos and buttons and, levers and all kinds of things your father put together. And then ultimately kind of technology itself has been a fundamental part of what you've done. And as I was looking into some things prior to having this discussion, that you have you've received a number of awards on the technology side, in addition to things like your songwriting, like the British Academy of Songwriters, Composers, and Authors. That's one of the awards of many, but technology has been at the core of what you've done, or a central aspect of it.
There's a big part of me that thinks at times music is almost a byproduct of what my interest is. My interest was in technology. When I first got my own electric guitar, I can't remember for sure, 11, maybe 10 or 11, 12, pre-teenage. I didn't really spend a great deal of time learning to play it. I learned some basic chords because my cousin taught me. But quite often, in fact, the majority of the time, I think, I would actually put the guitar on the stand, plug it into lots of pedals, and then just hit it like that, and then just twiddle, and it would make these amazing noises. This is before I knew about synthesizers. Yeah. And so my interest was never musical in the sense that I didn't learn scales and never learned any of that. I'm a very, very, very average player, even now to this day. I still don't know the names of chords on the piano. I know the individual notes, but I don't know the names of chords. And if you said play a G7th, not a clue. Right. Not a clue. Don't know what you're talking about. But that didn't matter to me because my interest wasn't in that. It wasn't in musical expertise or technique or scales or any of those things. Didn't care about any of that.
Yeah.
My interest was noise, sounds, what made amazing sounds. And then the challenge is, how do you make those weird sounds musical? And that's where the synthesizer, when it came along, was sort of the answer to my dreams, really, because all it did was make weird, brilliant noises, and then you had to find a way of making that musical. So I think in a way, the way I discovered the synthesizer was lucky, in the sense that I went into the studio as a normal band, a guitar, bass, drums, vocal band, and I found this machine that could add a whole world of different textures to that.
Yeah.
And so I, by chance, merged the two things together, a very conventional lineup with a very unconventional instrument, and you have this mixing of the two. Whereas what Kraftwerk had done, although they were successful in a different way, it had all been, there was no conventional lineups at all. And then you had your hardcore guitar bands over here. So I think, like I say, by chance, by luck, really, I put something together that had enough familiarity about it for people to get into. It still had the guitar, bass, drums, and melody and all that. But it had this whole other layer of weird noises and sounds and so on, which made it feel futuristic or experimental. And that appealed to other people. And so it crossed that fence between conventional and experimental perfectly. But through no design of mine, through just right place, right time, putting it together in the right way.
Yeah, but you had the vision at the time. It sounds like it was almost, when you saw the Moog and played with the Moog, it was a transformation in your own mind, like an aha moment, right? And so before we get into the specific song Cars from your album, Pleasure Principle, when you arrived at your sound with Two Boy Army and then with the release of Pleasure Principle, did you have some early indications from others that, wow, like this is hitting? Did you have an expectation in your mind at all that this was going to be something that would really take hold?
I did. I thought the instrument itself was going to change everything. Yeah, that was my argument with the record company to begin with. When I was doing the Pleasure Principle album, when we made our Friends Electric, for example, I didn't know. I mean, Our Friends Electric was #1 for 4 weeks in Britain. It was huge.
Yeah, it's a great song.
We were doing 40-odd thousand copies a day, which for Britain is just phenomenal. And yet when we were making it, I didn't see that as being a big single. It was it's too long. It's 5.25 minutes long. You can't dance to it. It doesn't have a chorus as such. And it's about robot prostitutes. It's not a good typical sort of song. And so I didn't have any, the first single from the album was called Down in the Park. And that's really slow, brooding kind of thing about machines that rape people.
Okay. Another light subject.
It's not the sort of thing you're going to hear on the radio, as a rule. So I was aware of that, and I knew that it was, the subjects are different and unusual and pretty dark, and so there's no chance of radio play. I didn't think there was any chance of TV for it. I had no expectations of any of that whatsoever. I was hoping that it would get me to a point where I would be able to sell out some of the more well-known sort of rock clubs, like the Marquee, for example, London. That was my ambition for it. I had great ambitions to be this massive rock star at some point in the future. I just didn't think that was going to be it. And so when Our Friends Electric took off and did all the things that it did, it did catch me by surprise. Really, I wasn't even that keen on having a rapid success, because I saw lots of problems with that. The problems with getting somewhere quickly is that you're very ill prepared for it. You haven't had a build-up of experience in how to handle bigger crowds on stages, bigger venues, how to put light shows together or stage shows together. You don't know how to deal with the press, and there's sometimes devious ways the press ask you questions because they're looking for a certain angle. All of those things, there's a huge amount to learn before you become successful, so that you can handle it properly when it arrives.
Of course.
And so a rapid rise to success, and an overnight success, which is kind of what mine was, is not the best way to do it. And I hadn't planned on that. I wasn't aiming for that, you know.
Right.
So when our Friends Electric took off, I was exactly what I'd feared I would be. I'm horribly ill prepared, and it was all a bit of it was pretty overwhelming, and it was shocking to me, and a great deal of it was unpleasant, and I didn't take to it well at all. I tried my best, and I certainly tried to keep my feet on the ground, and I never got arrogant or big-headed, any of that. I was always very aware of how lucky I'd been. I always have been, you know. But nonetheless, it's the maddest world to be dropped into the middle of when you're very young. And I've got Asperger's as well. It just adds a whole layer of extra difficulty to being in that position. I didn't have any management. I was looking after myself.
Interesting.
And I was with a label that itself hadn't had any success before. So I wasn't surrounded by people that could guide me and help me through it. So I really was bouncing off the walls there.
I bet.
For a few years, you know, till I got it sorted out.
And I would imagine, just based on what you were telling me about your label at the time and how they were, when you first gave them this sound, they were it was not what they were expecting, right? So they were probably surprised by the great success of it as well. Like,
yeah.
I would imagine. And they were thrilled by it, but still.
Yeah. I mean, it was very exciting. Yeah, I talk a lot about how it was shocking and overwhelming and so on, and as if it was all bad, but it wasn't all bad at all. There was, there were some amazingly exciting moments. You know, it's just an immense ride to suddenly find yourself on. And I've likened it many times actually to if you're standing at a train station and an shiny express train comes blasting through.
Yeah. And
you just put your hand out and you grab onto it and you're whisked away.
Yeah.
And everything's a blur, but you're still on the outside. You can't get into it, but you can see in. You can see all these glamorous people walking about, very comfortable, and they know what they're doing, and it seems very calm. But for me, it wasn't like that. For me, I'm on the outside looking in. I'm being battered to shit as this thing's roasting along, away from everything you know and love, away from everybody you know and love.
Yeah,
really. You're just taken off into a world that you've not experienced before, and at some point, you lose your grip. And you fall off, and it just keeps going on its merry way. And that's where I found myself a few years later. Yeah, and you're lost, and you're damaged, and you're battered, and you're looking for safety, really. And that was how the first few years of my career felt. So yeah, fantastic. No, but it was exciting. It's an amazing ride being up there.
Look, I bet. And so I got to follow up on that then. If you were saying that the first few years that you were you had grabbed onto this and you were looking in, but then there was a time a few years into it where you had fallen off, or how the way you kind of described it. How did you pick yourself up at that point and I don't know, rethink your approach to music, if at all?
I didn't actually. And when I say I feel off, that's not quite true. I let go.
Okay.
This would be 1981. I realized that what was going on was doing me no good whatsoever. I was either going to become a drunk or a drug addict. I was going to crumble under it. And so I made what I think a very sensible decision. I decided to pull out of the whole thing, just let go, back away, try to keep yourself together by trying to understand what had happened and trying to grasp it all and trying to come back at it with a more mature, knowledgeable, well thought out approach to it. And you can't do that when you're in the middle of the storm. You just can't. And so I made this very mature decision for somebody in that position, I think, and quite brave in a way, is to just step away from everything you've ever dreamed of.
Yeah.
But what I did wrong was saying I was going to do that. I made a great big announcement. I'm going to retire. I'm getting out of it. This is not what I thought, blah, blah, blah. And terrible mistake, Yeah, because then you create, you first of all, you alienate everybody that supported you. You annoy the fans, you annoy the record company, you annoy the promoters that are doing the gigs, the PR people, everyone that helped you get there and is now benefiting from where you are. They're all pissed off because now you just pulled the plug out of everybody and all of their efforts. And I didn't realize that. I was so immature. I mean, I didn't realize the damage that I was doing to other people.
Well, you were in your mid-20s at that time?
Oh yeah, 23. I was actually 22 when I made the decision. 23 when I actually
that you're going to retire.
Yeah, but I never meant to retire from everything. I just wanted to get away from touring.
Yeah,
where it's the madness was that intense, and I really wanted to go back home and kind of bring it back to the level of a hobby that it had been before, you know, when I loved it and it was just great. And I just sit in the studio all day, just making noises and making records. You know, I wanted to go back to that. I wanted it to be calm, and I didn't want all the chaos and the madness that come with it. You know, you got women sleeping with you and then writing about it in the press, and you know what I mean? There's all of that stuff comes in. You've got death threats. I've got more death threats than I could count. My mum got put under police protection because she was going to be kidnapped for money.
Crazy.
Yeah, petrol bomb put under the car and just shit, man. You know, there is, for every loving person out there that thinks you're, you know, God's gift to music, there's someone else that don't. You know, and they all kind of get to you in a way. And I just wanted to get away from it anyway. You know, and you can, you can navigate your way through that, but you need to be better informed than I was at that time. So that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to calm it all down, grow up a little bit, look at what had happened, work out what was good, what was not so good, and then find ways of navigating your way through that, which I did. But when it first happened, when I first sort of let go and dropped off, this would be 1981, I was just still not in a good place. And then I did so much damage to my career then. I pretty much killed it there and then. And so for the next 40 years, I spent the next 40 years trying to get back to where I was when I let go of the train, you know. But I think the real turning point came in 1992. So about 11 years later. So I struggled for those 11 years. It went from bad to worse throughout those 11 years, up to about 92, 93, actually. And I think I bottomed out about 92, 93. Worst album I ever made. My songwriting was awful. Ran out of money. Just trying to repossess my house. You know, I think everything was just it was pretty much as bad as it could get.
Yeah.
Then I met Gemma, my wife, who I'm still with now. And a few things happened. I met Gemma. She introduced me to music I hadn't heard before. I found very inspiring. We talked a lot about why it had gone wrong, why I was now pretty much, finished as from a musical point of view, career point of view. And I realized that the album I just put out really wasn't good enough. And I tried to understand where all the ideas had gone. All the imagination had vanished. And I used to be very, very imaginative, very creative, coming up with all sorts of things all the time. And now it was just my songwriting had just been constantly, album after album after album, about the career and the problems and no imagination whatsoever. Just like a boring diary,
Yeah.
Try to understand why that had happened. And but that was it. That moment of reflection, 92, 93, changed everything. And I gave up. I gave up in trying to save the career. I gave up on worrying about what record companies were saying and A&R men were saying. And I just went back to making music as a hobby again. Very inspired by some of the things Gemma had played to me. Things that were massive, but I just missed. Songs of Faith and Devotion, Depeche Mode. Amazing album. But I hadn't heard it. I hadn't heard it. That was a bit later, actually, 94, I think. Some of the Nin stuff, but just lots of really cool things that I hadn't heard.
The Nin stuff, Nine Inch Nails?
Yeah.
No, I know that Trent Reznor considers you to be a major influence on his music. Yeah,
which was amazing, really, because I didn't know that when I got into Nine Inch Nails. I found that out later, which is an amazingly cool surprise.
That's a very cool surprise.
Yeah. But listening to that sort of much heavier, more aggressive, darker use of electronic music, reminded me of what I've been doing before with things like Down in the Park and Hyperinch Electric and that. Not that they're industrial, I don't mean that, but there was a much darker, nastier sort of element to what I was doing when I started. And I'd lost that. You know, I drifted off into these other things, trying to sort of tread new ground, I suppose, as we each end, but just got more and more lost, strangely enough. Anyway, that changed everything. That really was a pivotal moment. I would say 92 to 94. 94, I did an album called Sacrifice, much darker, much heavier, much more aggressive than anything I'd done before. And I saw a direct link from that back to 79, Replicas, Pleasure Principle a little bit, that everything in between that you're sort of just push out. Not everything, but yeah, but some of it. Maybe an 1980 album's pretty good as well. It just went wrong. It didn't go wrong overnight. It just got increasingly more wrong as the 80s went on into the early 90s. Anyway, that was that. And then that actually did a little bit better. I realized that I loved making music again, and I hadn't for many years. I hadn't realized I'd sort of fallen out of love with it. And my imagination was back. I started to write stories again, you know, which I've been doing ever since. It just changed everything. So that moment of reflection, you know, getting to that really bad point, career-wise and creatively, was exactly what I needed, actually, you know, because it made you stop and rethink everything. Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
You know, if this isn't fun, why are you doing it? How can you make it fun again? How do you enjoy it again? And Gemma was amazing, actually. Gemma pointed out to me, and I argued against this for a good year, I think. My problem was I thought that my lack of ability was the problem. So I was getting in great players, great singers, and I was taking me more and more out of the records. And I thought that was the right thing to do because of my lack of musical ability. And Gemma said, but that's the very worst thing you could have done. She said to me at one point, she said, you might not be the best guitar player in the world, clearly, but people like the way you play it. Your limitations give you a style in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she said, you might not like your voice, which I don't. She said, but other people do. And you've taken that out of the records. She said, the very thing that people got into your music for is the very thing you've now taken out of it progressively over the last 5 or 6 years or so. And, you know, it needs a certain amount of ego to accept that that's true. You know, it was all about me. And I don't have that. I didn't agree with that. You know, I think, no, that's completely wrong. You know, these are great players. They make the albums better. But eventually, she was incredibly persistent and very, because I was really argumentative. You know, I'd go steaming back into that. But eventually,
you didn't buy it.
No. Quite aggressively didn't buy it. But eventually I did. Eventually I understood what she was saying. And it all pieced together with my own desire to want to go back to being more experimental again. And I had, you know, all this new inspiring music that I've been listening to. And all those things together created, it was like a reinvention for me. And it changed everything about why I was doing it, the music that I was making, you know, the reasons for making it, what I wanted from it, everything. It just changed everything. And I've been on that path ever since. So from 94 Sacrifice up to now Intruder, I've been on that same path.
Yeah, no, it's a theme that I hear a lot when I'm speaking with, you know, great artists such as yourself. It's that when you let it go to a certain extent, you let it go, almost take the pressure off and just let yourself be in the moment as much as possible, not think too much. Yeah. And the idiosyncratic nature of your music, which is what people are drawn to, flows out of that. You know, that's something that I hear over and over again. And your music is definitely idiosyncratic, and you led the way. You were a pioneer at this sound. And that's what people are drawn to, for sure.
You know what? It felt to me as if the worrying about the career, the worrying about trying to save it from the disaster that it had become through my own fault, the pressure of that was like a weight on sitting on top of your imagination, on your creativity. As soon as that was gone, as soon as I gave up worrying about radio players and chart positions and record companies and A&R men, get rid of all that. I don't care about any of that now. It's just going to be a hobby again. I thought my career was over. You know, I didn't have a record deal in 92, 93, 94. Didn't have one. There didn't seem to be any chance I'd ever get another one. My records weren't doing anything, you know, and they weren't even very good. And so when you take away all that pressure and that worry and that anxiety, it just, my imagination went, oh, poof, there we go. It was back, you know, and it was instant.
And you knew, and you felt it.
And I loved it again. And I was coming up with all these characters and scenarios, and I writing all these stories about a place between death and life where God can't find you. I started to write a book called Prey, the Final Treachery of God. Then there's something else out there, way more powerful than a God, but it does live in this middle layer. And it senses when you're there. And in the book, these people had found a way of, they get to that point where they transition to realize that heaven is not what you expected at all. And it's horrific. And they don't want to go. And they find a way of going sideways. And they find this middle layer between the two states. But as soon as they get there, this other thing goes, and it's coming. And they know it's coming. And it was all about this. There's a speech at the beginning of the album where I did it in this sort of weird kind of husky kind of animal voice, which is how you sound when you're in this middle layer. And it's talking about that, you know, this thing that's coming. And it was, I just loved it. You know, everything I've written up until then had been about, terrible career troubles, you know.
Yeah.
Poor little me, you know, things are going badly. And then all of a sudden, all this stuff is back, you know, and it's all a bit mental, but I loved it. And I was really happy. It felt like I was back to my old self, you know, and I'm so.
Hey, by the way, that sounds like the makings of a great grim fairy tale, you know, it's, something like that.
One day, you know, when I'm not so busy with the music, I'll finish all those. I got that's about half a dozen different novels that I started like that.
Very different kind of children's book right there.
Yeah.
Be a great Tim Burton film.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. But yeah, one day I would love to finish all those things. I really do have. I mean, Intruder, Savage. There's another album called Death Sun Rising, Pleasure Principle even, and Replicas, The Sacrifice. All those albums started out as stories, all of them. Mm-hmm. And I just took the ideas from the stories and turned them into songs instead. And then you make the album, and then you tour it, and you start making another album. You never get back to the story. You never get back to finish it because you're just always on something else. Yeah. So I've got all of these sort of unfinished novels sitting out there that one day I would love to do. In fact, I'd seen my latter years, even more latter than I am now, my very latter years, sort of pulling back out of music considerably, completely perhaps, and then just devoting what remains of my life to writing these stories that I've started over my life, you know.
Well, that would be fascinating too. And you mentioned Pleasure Principle and that story. And going back to that, let's get into the song Cars and how that came to be, what the inspiration was, just how it flowed out from where you were at that point in your life and in the music transformation that you went through. Tell me about it. Like, tell me the genesis of that song.
Well, I wanted to learn to play bass guitar better. I had a bass player, Paul Gardner, who committed suicide actually a few years later. Got into had a drug problem. Lovely man, like a great bass player. And I was a little bit frustrated with the fact that I wasn't always able to explain to him exactly what I was after because I couldn't play well enough to guide him along the way. Not a big deal, but I thought, you know, I'd go and get a bass guitar. I learned to play bass a bit better than I can at the moment, and it will help, you know. So I did that. I went to London. There's a street called Shaftesbury Avenue, which is right in the heart of where all the music shops used to be. And I bought a thing called a Shergold Modulator, which I've still got, and got it home. I went into my mum and dad's like little side room that I had a piano in it that they'd got me, where we used to rehearse with the band at times. And it's where I wrote Opera's Electric on that same piano. And it all happened in that room. Where I come up with the name Tube Army, all in that room.
How about that?
Yeah, it's amazing room. My mum died in that room actually, eventually. So it's that room has pretty much got my whole life wrapped up in it in one way or another. Yeah. Anyway, so I get home to that room and I open the case and pick out this Shergold guitar, and the very, very first thing I play went doo 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 doo. That was it. First 4 notes straight out. I hadn't even tuned it, you know.
You weren't even thinking at the time. You were playing.
Very first 4 notes. I put it on my knee. You know, you get something and you sit down and you go, you strum, or with the bass guy, you'll pluck something. That was it. First 4 notes. And I thought, that sounds all right. Yeah. And then the next 4 notes, I absolutely swear to you, on my mum's life, the first 8 notes I played on it were the 8 notes from Cars. It wrote itself.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. And
I spent another 10 minutes maybe doing the other bit, you know, do that bit. All on bass guitar. Never touched the keyboard when I wrote it. I find it sort of funny that it's become this electronic sort of classic song now. And I wrote it on a bass guitar. Didn't even write it on a piano, I wrote it on a bass guitar. But that was it. And then
Can you imagine, by the way, right then at that moment where you were in the room and you just picked it up and you were just playing, you know, just you had it sounds like you had no thought in your mind that you were going in there to write a song of any kind, and how that experience, those sounds like minutes.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Are so lasting in everybody's lives, the pop culture, not pop culture, the music culture of the last decades.
It took me about 10 minutes to do the 3 parts, to get them all worked out into some kind of an order. You know, so the whole thing, all the parts are written and the basic arrangement sorted out in about 10 minutes. And then I wrote some lyrics for it. It took about another 20 minutes. Dead simple lyrics. You know, it's about a road rage incident and why I feel safe in cars. Really. So really simple. And I think the road rage thing had only happened not that long before. So it was pretty fresh to me. No, not long, but a year or so before, you know. But
let me stop you there for a second though. Okay. So Cars came out of that thought. There was a road rage incident that entered your mind for some reason at that time. Did you just tell me a little bit more about how you why you think that came to you and felt right with what you had just played on the guitar?
I can't remember exactly why it came to mind, but it was a big moment for me. You know, that I was driving through London, coming out of London actually, and some people in the car in front, a van actually in front, got out and started trying to get me, attacking me effectively. So I assumed that I must have cut them up or done something. I didn't know, but I must have done something because they were really angry. And they were trying to open my doors, now banging on the window and, you know, swearing at me. And, you know, they were obviously going to give me a bit of a kicking if they'd got me out of the car. And terrified, you know, I'm not a particularly fighty sort of person, really frightened. We were in traffic. I couldn't go anywhere, you know. But then the traffic on the left moved. I was able to just shoot across quickly. Went up onto the pavement, drove along the pavement to get past the traffic. I was panicking, you know, scattering pedestrians, and shot off the end onto another street and got away. But that it was a big thing. You know, it was really frightening and very traumatic, and it left a lasting impression on me. And for some reason, I'd written this little bass line tune thing, but trying to write some words, and that was very, very much in the forefront of my mind for some reason. It probably was a lot, you know. I was probably thinking about it every day still.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where the "Here in My Car" thing come from, because it just fitted so perfectly with the do. You know, that everything is based around 4 notes on that song. Everything is 4s. And it just made perfect sense. And then to develop that into the way that then made you feel about the car, about feeling safe inside it, and how you can be these different things and these different images and so on. That all just sort of poured out in that moment really. But it wasn't a lyric I'd had sitting around. It wasn't an idea that I'd had sitting around, as the tune wasn't. I mean, everything about that song just fell into place in that 30 minutes I worked on it. I mean, the whole thing, from opening the case to having a finished lyric, was about 30 minutes. Quickest song I ever wrote by far.
Isn't that incredible? That's
yeah.
And again, that's a theme that I've heard with some other musicians who have had a song that is so lasting in the, you know, pop culture for decades, similar kind of thing, that it just flowed out in 30, 40 minutes. It's pretty incredible.
Well, there are other things that were added later, and I think, and quite key elements to it, really. You know, I think the thing that a lot of people remember about it would be that, you know, it's got that little wobbly bit at the front, and then it goes into that big keyboard line that just sits there. Well, the thing about the wobbling, I remember that from when I used to hit my guitar. You know, I like an MXR tremolo pedal, and if you burn it right up, it go so I remember that from back then. But the keyboard line, which is I think that's probably the most memorable thing about Cars, is that keyboard line. So that wasn't written in those first 30 minutes. It was just the bass line and the arrangement and the lyrics. When we got to the studio, that's when I started to add the synthesizers and the big moog, you know, to beef that whole thing up. And then you start to add that big string line over the top of it. I didn't have any idea for that. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do with that. So we were in the studio and we got the drums and the bass and all that down. So you got the groove of the song, but there's no strings on it at all at that point, no high synth line. And so I went to record some just to see what came to mind. And I pressed that first key down. And then I couldn't think of anything. Because that's why it stayed, you know, at the start of the song, that high keyboard, and it just stays there for ages and doesn't do anything. Well, that was me in the studio, not knowing what to do. I went, I'm thinking, I can't think of anything. And it's still going. I'm still holding that note. And then I got frustrated. I went, like, sort of angry. And it was nearly those notes from that. It wasn't quite it, but I thought, that worked. That actually sounded all right, man.
Yeah, a happy accident.
Yeah.
Another one.
Yeah. So holding that first note on for ages actually really, really worked. It just gave it a power, but it needed that little descending thing at the end to sort of resolve the whole thing. And when I'd sort of just scatterly done it because I was frustrated, I hit most of those notes, but not all of it. So I just refined that idea to come up with an actual line that worked, that was in time. It wasn't just me being angry.
Yeah.
And that became that sort of signature part of the song as it progressed. And the other thing about Cars is it doesn't have enough words. Most of the singing is done in the first minute. So then there's another 2 or 3 minutes of song. So it's almost an instrumental with just a tiny little bit of vocal at the front end of it. I wish I'd have written more words for it, but I never.
But Gary, it worked okay.
Yeah, it did. But if you go on the telly with that, or when you do it live,
yeah,
you sing it, you do your bit, and then there's nothing to do, and you got to stand there for another 2 or 3 minutes trying to look interesting, and there's nothing to do. Yeah, so I used to have funny. A keyboard on stage and pretend to play the keyboard on anything, because I can't dance. It's not like I could do a Michael Jackson or for those 3 minutes. So I was just standing there looking like a lemon, not knowing what to do.
Well, which was the Gary Numan persona of that album, right?
Looking like a lemon.
Well, no, but standing. I don't know if that was a conscious persona or whether that was you weren't natural doing it any other way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The whole sort of staring at the camera, kind of trying to look at it.
It all worked. It all worked.
Yeah,
really well.
It did. It did work, but on the inside, I'm thinking I should be doing something more than this.
Yeah. That's funny though. It's very funny. and so it's my understanding again, and I know the album pretty well. I grew up with that album, obviously, and there are no guitars on that album, I don't believe.
No.
And so you created this song on a bass guitar. That's how it all came to be. And yet, ironically, there's not a single guitar on that album.
Well, it has bass guitar on the album. It just doesn't have a rock 6-string guitar.
Okay.
So there's bass guitar on it, drums in it. I think there's a viola on it. So it's still got conventional instruments. It just doesn't have a guitar. And that was a reaction to what the press said about the album before. The press was saying that it's not real music. Which is crazy because the album before has got guitar all over it. Arthur Intellectual's got guitar all over it. But there was a lot of ignorance and a lot of a sort of knee-jerk reaction to electronic music when it first came along. Lots of silly things said. The musicians' union, the union in Britain that governs, but it's a union you have to belong to. Does a lot of good actually, but back then it was a problem. They tried to ban me because they said I was putting real musicians out of work.
Yeah.
How insulting was that?
How do you react to something like that?
Well, the thing I said was that, look, all right, if you can, I said the majority of the noises and the sounds that the keyboards are making are not conventional instruments. And I'm not trying to create conventional instrumentation sounds. Even the one on cars is called Vox Humana. It's meant to be like a voice screaming. It's not meant to be stringed, though it sounds a bit stringy. I said, look, most of the noises are going, they're just weird noises. So you show me a man that plays that, and I'll understand what you're saying. yeah, I'll get them in. I said, but that's not what we're doing. We are not trying to replace conventional instruments by making things that sound like conventional instruments.
Yeah.
We are trying to come up with sounds that you've never heard before, that nothing else makes. So how am I putting musicians out of work? I've got a 6-piece band. 6 people, including me, in the band when it first started. It varied between 5 and 6. I said, I'm employing lots of people in the band. So I can pick on the 3-piece.
Exactly.
Who aren't employing as many musicians as I am. How am I putting musicians up?
Yeah.
So it was really, but it was all part of that sort of anti-reaction to electronic music when it first came along. There were people saying that I didn't write the songs, that the machines wrote the songs. I don't know if you've ever played a Minimoog, but it doesn't write anything.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make a noise at all until you twiddle with it. It doesn't even have a sequencer in it. It was frustrating at times because there were people that really should have known better. Organizations that were meant to be representing me and my interests that are actually actively trying to shut me down. If you're not in a musicians union, for example, you can't go on television in Britain. You couldn't back then anyway. So if they had succeeded in expelling me from their union, which is what they also tried to do, I wouldn't have been able to do Top of the Pops. I wouldn't have been able to do any of the TV shows or radio shows. Couldn't got played on the radio. Even Radio 1, the biggest radio station at the time, wouldn't playlist Archangel Electric until it had been #1 for 3 weeks. The only time I've ever known a #1 single not being playlisted on the radio. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So there was a huge amount of resistance against it. The press hated it. By the time I'd made my 4th album, I could count my good reviews on one hand and have fingers to spare.
Yeah.
So it was difficult. It was really, really difficult. And the public went for it massively. Yeah, absolutely. It was amazing, absolutely amazing, the reaction to it. And I think without that phenomenal support from the public and the fans, and then the other obstacles there would have shut me down before I made another album. There was a lot of obstacles. The resistance to electronic music when it first came along in that first 6 months to a year was incredible. And then it just seemed as if that the door had fallen open.
Yeah.
And then it was just nothing but electronic music. Every record label signed electronic bands. All these great people started coming along. All the people that have been doing it before me now had an opportunity to come out and be heard. Human League and Orchestral Maneuvers and all these people.
Sure.
So it went from being this huge, no, we're having none of that, to everyone's welcome.
Which is not surprising, getting back to kind of what we've talked about on technology and the evolution of technology and how that transforms society. And it was always fundamental to what you did, that the media business, entertainment business has always fought against technology transforming what it knew at the time. But yet that it marches on and it evolves the art. And it's just, that's what happens and has always happened from the beginnings of time.
Yeah, but I've got no bad feelings about it at all. I really don't.
Of course.
I absolutely understand that something comes along that's new and it's different. A lot of people are not going to like it. Not a lot of people are not going to want it. I remember reading things about, fears about it would replace a guitar, which seemed to be ridiculous to me. But, but that's why I made Pleasure Principle with no guitars. The press was so aggressively hostile to what I was doing. There was so much talk about, the guitar is so important. The guitar is everything. The guitar, blah, blah, blah. And I love the guitar. My favorite instrument is guitar to this day. But I just thought that's ridiculous. It can't be the be all and end all of music. Look at what these machines can do. We should be welcoming these machines.
Absolutely.
Not resistant. So I made Pleasure Printer without any guitars in it to prove a point. To prove that you can make a conventional album. You don't have to have a guitar in it to make a good album. And then there you have cars. Proves the point. You don't have to have guitars. Well, I love them. They've been in every other album I've ever made ever since. So it's only that one album I didn't have guitars on. But I just wanted to make the point.
Expanding the palette for an artist, right? It's just new ways to produce art.
Yeah.
Well, look, I love that journey. Let's get into the second song. And this is something that I asked you, which song, Gary, would you like to discuss? One of your favorite songs from your entire repertoire. And you talked about, and you mentioned the song from your latest album that just came out in May, I believe, right? It was just released. So this is a fresh song. And tell us about The Gift, which is the song that you chose from this latest album. And the same kind of thing. First of all, what is it about that song that is particularly resonant to you or resonates with you? And then how it came to be at this point in your career?
Well, the Gift is from the Intruder album.
Mm-hmm.
The Intruder album I was making before the pandemic hit. And yet, Intruder is about the earth speaking. If the earth could speak about the way it feels at the moment, about what we're doing to it, how we have betrayed it, what would it say? And so you have an album which is talking about its relationship with us and how its relationship with us has changed and evolved from when we first, crawled out of the oceans and started to learn to walk upright, and the earth surrounded us and nurtured us and gave us everything we wanted. And we've grown to such a point that we could arguably call an infestation. And now we're abusing the planet and we have no regard, self-obsessed, self-destructive, So that whole question about the way that human beings have evolved on the planet and how the way we've used the planet has changed and become destructive and how the planet itself feels about that. So that was the theme behind Intruder. I recorded about 3/4 of it before the pandemic hit. And within the songs on the album, the idea of the earth fighting back against us was already well established. That we may have been in an unknown war with the planet since the Industrial Revolution, when we first started to use machinery in a very destructive way. Mm-hmm. The possibility that human beings may be a mistake of nature rather than its crowning glory was a part of the album. In that way, the earth now sees us. Nature made us too curious, too inquisitive, too ingenious, too intelligent. And it gave us opposable thumbs. It gave us the ability to create tools, which means machinery. And so the rot sets in at that point. We become destructive as soon as you have machinery. So all of things are running through the album. And then the pandemic arrives and we have this brand new virus, which is attacking us. And it just fed so perfectly into what the album was already saying. Maybe COVID is nature-driven, nature-created. Maybe it's a weapon that the earth is using against us. Maybe it's the first of many, or maybe it's the current one of many that have been there before. I'm still working on that one. But the idea of COVID being a weapon, a weaponized virus created by the planet to fight against us, was a fascinating idea for me and fitted into what Intruder was saying all along. So I wanted to write about it. So that's what The Gift is. The Gift is a song about COVID, but from the point of view of it being a weaponized virus created by the planet to bring our numbers down. There would be more, ever more refined, ever more deadly, and we are going to be using our ingenuity to fight against this as we battle our way along. as we've seen with the variants, you know. I just thought that was a fascinating idea. So I decided to write about it. So I wrote The Gift, and The Gift starts as a very gentle little beat. It's almost it's almost happy, almost. And then the lyric starts, and when the lyric starts, the first verse is, again, it's quite gentle. There's not much going on. It's talking about it as a gift, you know, how amazed you're going to be by it. It's going to take your breath away because it's so great, he says. So it's sarcastic. And then there's no choruses. It goes right through. I think there's 3 verses in a row until you get to the first chorus. The second verse comes in and it's heavier and starts to mean a bit more. And the lyrics just shift slightly. And then you think, it's not good, is it, this thing, you know? And then you get to the third verse, and then it's just angry, and it's just going, this is why, this is what you've done, this is why this is here. So the song lyrically evolves into the earth just kind of spilling it all out. This is what it's doing. And then you get to the chorus, and then the whole thing just lifts up. Anyway, so that's the idea of song. That's why it's structured the way it is. That's why it builds the way it does, and the lyric evolves the way it does. There are other things, and there are other things with it. The thing I really love about the Gift and why I chose it is there is an instrument called a yebahar. There's a man called Gorkum Sen, who's a Turkish man, but I believe lives in Cyprus. He's created this instrument called a yebahar, only one of its kind in the world. He's the only one that can play it, obviously. And I was chatting to a fan some time ago about my love of Middle Eastern melodies and instrumentation, and why I've sprinkled them in my music off and on for decades, you know. I love the unpredictability of Eastern melodies. You never quite know where they're going. You do with our music, you do, because you're familiar with it, you know. But with Eastern music, Middle Eastern music, you don't know where it's going. And I love it. Anyway. So he said, this fan said to me, Dominic Clark, his name was, he said, you should listen to this man called Gorkum Sen. He said, he does all what you're talking about. He said, and there's a video of him on YouTube doing an improvisation with a keyboard player. I think it's German, but I'm not sure. So I checked it all out, and sure enough, there's this amazing video on YouTube. This keyboard man doing some great stuff, you know, huge beats and amazing sound. I was loving that. And then Gorkum's in the room with him, and he starts to improvise with the yebahar. And you can bow it, or you can play it with fingers. And it's just like a central stem with strings. It looks very Middle Eastern, you know, classic Middle Eastern sort of thing. Yeah. But then I think there's springs. It looks like big, long, wobbly springs coming up of it, which are connected to drums. And the drums change depending on what sort of effect you want. So he's doing all this amazing stuff. And then he'll just lean forward and he'll hit a spring and he goes, and just stuff happens. You know, it's like a synthesizer, but with nothing, no wires and no switches. It's an organic. It is the most amazing thing I'd ever heard, and yet it has this very Middle Eastern feel to it. Yeah. So for me, it was just the best of both worlds. You know. Anyway, so we got in touch with Gorkum, and I said to him, "Yeah, I'd love you to be on the album because it's such a cool thing." Yeah. And to have something truly organic, Middle Eastern, you know, when
completely
you're
one of a kind, one of a kind, right?
It was such a perfect fit for what we were doing, and I'd seen it worked.
And you can definitely hear that vibe in that song for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean when that solo kicks in towards the end of it, I can't remember. I don't think I've ever had a solo on any of my music before. Because I'm not musical that way, you know. So to have one on it was pretty special anyway. But it just flies, and it just takes off. The very first time I heard it, Aid, who produced it, got the recording in and he sent it to me, just a clip of where we were going to use it for the solo. And I sat in my studio and listened to it. And it was such a moment. I remember I just leaned back in my chair and I just put my arms out like that.
That's cool.
Whoa. And all the hairs on my arms came up.
Yeah.
Whoa. It was so brilliant. Anyway, so to have him on it, to have the instrument on it, to have something on their song, which is the only one of its kind in the world, was really, really special. For it to be about a world-changing event, a rare event in human history. To have something like that when you're singing a song about that, when you're bringing that song into the part, we may actually be at war with the planet and have never known it. Fighting for your survival. It was a moment for me. And I'm really, really, really proud of the song. I'm really proud of the lyrics. I'm absolutely blown away that Gorkum agreed to be on it, and what he contributed to it was special. For me, it's a real highlight of the album. So and it's fresh, man. You're always kind of most excited about your more recent things. So I think that might have had something to do with it as well.
Well, I would imagine also that's very cool, first of all, but I would imagine that the idea first, or the connection came first from a fan. That's pretty interesting too. So ultimately the interaction you had with a fan led to the introduction, or your discovery of this person that led to an introduction that led to this being your favorite track on your new album, which was one of these kind of moments where you just feel like that's it. Like that's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful thing. So it's pretty, that journey.
I talk to sort of other musicians, regularly, obviously. And it surprises me sometimes, not all of them, some of them are lovely, but it surprises me sometimes how some of them think of their fans as being, how can I put this kindly?
You don't need to be kind.
you just they don't see them as people, with skills and lives of their own. They just see them as objects. Somebody to run past after a gig. Somebody to buy your album. And that's not my experience at all. My experience has been, and there's a reason for this actually. My experience has been that every person that buys your record or is interested in what you're doing is a unique person, with their own skills and talents and their own interests and their own, their own life experiences, and they are fascinating. Can be, So to Dominic, my conversation with Dominic has given me something which has made arguably one of the best songs I've ever written. I don't know if that would have happened without that conversation, and the reason this means a lot to me is because when I was younger, I used to go to a venue in London called the Rainbow. It's the church now, and see bands there regularly. And I would always go and hang out by the stage door, and the artists would come out and they'd rush through the fans into their limo and disappear. And, that was all very exciting. You got to get a glimpse of them as they ran past. But no one ever stopped. No one ever chatted, And I went to see Queen there once, and we waited outside the stage door as always. And then someone come out and invited us in, all of us, the whole group of people out there were invited into the dressing room, and Queen were all there, Freddie, Brian, all of them. They all took time. They all chatted to everybody. They signed everything you wanted and did photographs and that. Not that I had a camera, which is a regret. But I just thought, what an amazing thing that is. No one else had ever done that. No one else had ever given the time to their fans the way Queen did.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I just
amazing.
thought, and I never forgot it. And I thought, I wonder if, I did meet Freddie Mercury again, all of them, many years later, and I've got other cool stories to do with Freddie. And I was able to tell him, I said, you won't remember me, but I was a little 16-year-old kid once when you invited us in, and you were lovely. And I said, and it's stayed with me for my whole life. And now I treat my fans the way you treated me. So I know that when I'm talking to fans, in amongst them are the rock stars of tomorrow. They're the brain surgeons of tomorrow. They're the fighter pilots. They are the impressive people of the future. And you should treat everybody as if they're important. And as if they're special. I don't like this. I don't like this dismissive attitude that people have got about them. These are very cool people. My wife, the most amazing person I've ever met, the most important person in my life, was a fan.
Yeah.
Many years ago. He used to come to all the gigs. Imagine being dismissive about the most important person in the world.
who really, as you said, helped you reshape and transform your life into positivity.
Yeah, that's why I'm here now. Without her, wouldn't be here.
It's amazing.
Very different. Yeah.
And one cool thing about technology, first of all, I love that story. The one really cool thing about technology now is that there's more ways than ever for artists and fans to be able to interact with one another. And I would love to get into some of that thing, but I've already taken so much of your time, but I do want to, I know, but it's fascinating. I love the journeys through these songs, and they're really interesting. I have to, well, first of all, I'll touch upon some of the things that you're getting into. You just released your new album. Intruder. So that just came out in May. So it's available now. Everybody check out The Gift. It's a really cool song, but the rest of the songs on the album too, for sure. And then you released an autobiography in October of last year. Yeah. And so that's going to be fascinating to check that out, to hear, I'm sure, some of these stories and anecdotes about how you transformed your life. But then you also start touring in September again. And we just have a short period of time, but how do you feel? You've been, like all of us, locked up now for well over a year, and things have started to open up again, which is wonderful. Although, as we sit here, Gary, now Los Angeles County is back into a potential mask mandate of some kind. So we don't know where things are going. Like you said, Mother Nature is humbling us, continues to humble us.
Yeah.
But how do you feel after being holed up for such a period of time, now starting to tour again? Like, what is your frame of mind?
Well, I'm excited about it. I think when you join a band, the life that you imagine is being on the road, touring, standing in front of people, all the excitement and the euphoria of those moments. I don't think I don't remember sitting at home when I was a kid dreaming about being in the studio. Yeah. I remember dreaming about being out and crowds and screaming and all that sort of excitement. So that's really that's the life choice that you make when you decide that music's going to be your thing. It was for me anyway. So when it's not there, when it's taken away, as it has been for the last year and a half or more, it's devastating, really, because it's, in a way, a significant part of why you live is no longer available to you. And I really do feel like that. It feels like a massive part of my life is missing. And so to be able to get back to it, I won't be moaning about the dressing rooms anymore. You get to some dodgy, horrible little dressing room somewhere and it's damp and I'm going to just go, this is great. I won't be moaning about this anymore. There's all of the things that I grumbled about before, I don't care about anymore. I've reevaluated.
We've reevaluated,
right? Yeah. But I'm really looking forward to it, man. I've missed it very much.
And how did, just one thought about while you were trapped, like we all were, how did you try to stay connected to fans?
Oh, it's not been easy, actually. First of all, I was making a record, so for a big chunk of it, I was just in the studio anyway. So, but I do have, I have a Patreon page where I do Q&As every month, people sending questions. I do video updates every month. So there's that going on. Intruder was part of I think called a Making Music campaign, where I, again, would do regular updates and let people see the songs being progressed and how they grew into what they became, and why the changes were made when they were made, and the evolution of the sleeve and all those. They were very much a part of all of that. So there was that going on as well. I don't interact a great deal on social media because there's too many idiots want to just cause trouble and be nasty, so I tend to back away from that. Smart. Most of my sort of personal contact comes through touring. I do meet and greets every night. We have people come to rehearsals. We have 25 people a day come to rehearsals to join in and see how we rehearse. And a big part of that would be finishing, chatting to people are allowed to play the keyboards, and they want to play my guitar, they can. So we try to involve them in it as much as we can. And
the fans can learn more about that when they go to your website. of how they can get involved in those kinds of things?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There's the store sells, you know, the tickets for that.
Okay.
But yeah, but that's I think so. I mean, I've not looked at a website for a bit. That's terrible. I've just had the website sort of given a facelift.
Well, you got to focus on the music, right, and the performance. You can't do it all. You can't do it all. That's why
so much to do. You know, I manage myself as well, so So some things I lose the. Drop the ball with a little bit here and there, and I think the website's one of them.
We all need good teams right around us. I have to ask you before we go also, because I had no idea that you were a pilot, helicopter pilot, as well as an airplane pilot, and that you taught aerial aerobatics or acrobatics. So planes that are synchronized and doing all those crazy things. I don't know how many people know about that, Gary, but how did that come to be? And during your career, throughout your career, at least up to a certain point, I'm not sure if you still do this, you were doing double duty. You were actually actively involved in that part of your life too. So how did that happen?
I was an air display pilot. I used to do exhibition flying at weekends all over Europe, flying World War II airplanes, combat airplanes. So we would do battle scenarios, formation. I was in a big formation team with 5 or 6 airplanes. And then I did a 2-ship after that called the Radial Pair. It was great. Yeah, then I was a low-level formation aerobatic pilot with World War II combat airplanes. Did that for years.
But how does that even happen? How did that come to be?
Oh, I always loved airplanes. I was we've got a thing in Britain called the Air Training Course, like an RAF for kids.
Okay.
You know? And I did that for a long time. And then when I had my flying license before the music took off. So I was took off. My whole lifelong interest in airplanes. And then when the music thing did do well, I was able to buy my own airplane. And then I bought a twin-engine one. I had a little airplane business for a while, doing air taxiing. I flew around the world in a little airplane.
I read that you flew around the world.
Yeah, I did the helicopters. So I did multi-engine airplanes, with passengers, and did all that. Got a license for that. Instrument flying, helicopters, jet helicopters. And then I got into air display flying. Then I got into historic old tailwheel airplanes, big, very powerful. That was amazing. I mean, I did that for about 15 years, I think. Became an examiner for that.
Now that would be a very cool thing if you're a flying student and Gary Numan is your instructor for learning how to fly.
I was doing it once. I had blue hair.
Yeah, exactly. So I go to get my pilot license. I open the door and there's my captain who's teaching me. My teacher is Gary Numan. Now that would be a pretty interesting experience.
Yeah, I didn't teach people to get their license. I taught people that were beyond that.
Okay.
So these are people that had licenses and now were wanting to do air display flying. I would get involved at that point. I didn't do that for long, actually. I mean, I was an air display pilot for a really long time, but the teaching people, man, that was risky. Some of those people are arrogant,
I bet. I bet.
Yeah.
And so do you fly still?
No, I got out of it. I got out of it quite some time ago. What happened was, the team that I was in, there were 5 people in it. My brother was in it at one point, actually. And of the original 5 people, 3 of them were killed. Of the original 6 people, actually, 4 of them were killed in different crashes. My teammate, when I had the 2-ship Radial Pair thing, he was killed in a crash. And all the people that were doing it when I got into it, the heroes of mine that were great, most of those were killed. We were losing 4 or 5 people a year, and it's a very, very small community of air display pilots in Britain. Yeah. And it went from being something that was incredibly exciting and that you were really proud to be a part of, because it's a very difficult thing to be accepted in, especially coming from a music background. Most of the people that do it are ex-Air Force or whatever, So very difficult to be accepted. So to be accepted into that, by showing the ability that you have was a really big thing for me. And it was going in tandem with a music career. But it went from being this amazingly cool, exciting thing to being depressing, man. Because after a few years, you turn up at an air show and half the people that you cared for were gone, killed. And you saw people killed. And it changed. I still love the flying. That was still exciting. And I, had more than a few moments where you thought you were, that could be you next.
I'm sure.
But that's part of it. That's the thrill of it. You're doing something demanding and difficult, and it is dangerous. And that that's a possibility. So when it happens and you get through it, you think, whoa, that was close. You're kind of pumped. Whoa, that was amazing. Which seems childish, but it's a part of it,
Of course.
But then there just comes a point. It stops being that.
Yeah.
You just think, God, this kills everybody. It's just, it's just a matter of time, So I was in that mindset. I got into that mindset. This is just a matter of time, really. I love this, but it's, you almost like you feel the ends coming in a little bit. My really closest friend was killed in a crash at Goodwood. And that really upset Gemma, and she didn't want me to do it anymore because that was one too close,
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about having a family. We started trying to have children.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's enough, really. It was.
That makes you rethink. That makes everyone rethink priorities for sure.
Yeah, there's no way that it's too reckless a thing to do, too dangerous a thing to do when you've got young children who need you. The children aren't going to want to go and sit down an airfield every weekend watching dad disappear. So you got and I wanted to be with them at that point. I just want to do what they want to do, and so it didn't fit in anymore. And I pulled out of it with the intention of getting back into it, a few years later.
Right.
But it's not worked out that way. I still, every spare moment I get, I want to be with the children. I want to do what they want to do. We'll do things together. And now, my hearing's gone. So if I got in an aeroplane now, the air traffic are talking to, I wouldn't know what they were saying. It's really awkward. I live in America, let's try and listen to air traffic with an American accent. I'm not going to understand. I struggle as it is, but add an accent to it and I'm fucked, man.
Listen, I just thought it was a fascinating thing, which surprised me. But at the same time, when you think about your career and how you were at the bleeding edge of transforming music at that time and really changing the sound from the 70s to the 80s, which is, there's a lot of fearlessness that comes with that. And adrenaline junkie and all that sort of thing. But one last question. Well, two questions, actually. If you weren't a musician and you didn't have success in what would you have done, do you think, if you ended up early on, your music career did not take off like it did? What other profession or life do you think you would have led?
I've been a racing driver or a fighter pilot.
Okay.
They're the only two things I'm interested in. So I'd have gone for one of them.
Okay, gotcha.
In fact, when we was at school, the careers teacher said to me, what sort of career do you want to go into? Banking or accountancy or whatever. And I said, I can't tell you what I want to do. I said, I can only tell you what I want it to give me. And I said, I want it to be exciting, endlessly challenging. It's got to involve travel. There's got to be a creative element to it. Something like that. Every single day is an adventure. Yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want my life to be. And he said, I can't help you with that.
You had to help yourself.
Yeah, off you go. Yeah. So that was it. Rock, pop star, music, flying or racing.
Okay. And then who of the current contemporary music scene, who are you listening to? Who do you find as an emerging artist, somebody or band that you find to be an interesting song or just an interesting artist that you respect?
I don't really follow music, actually. I'm ashamed to say. I don't listen to radio. I can't remember the last time I put on an album to listen to for pleasure. Probably when I was in my 20s. I'm 63 now. I was probably in my early 20s. And that's the truth. I am a source of great frustration to my kids. We go out in the car. I don't want the radio on. I bought everyone's got they've got their own phones now, but when they were younger, they had their own iPods rather. So you want to listen to music, but you can each have your own iPod and listen to it with your headphones on, because I don't want to hear it. Driving is for thinking. Sitting at home is for thinking. I find that there is enough noise in the world that I don't need to listen to music for entertainment. You know, I feel really guilty saying that, because, you know, as a musician, you know, music should be everything that you think about, but it isn't. It isn't. I make records because I love making records and I like writing songs, but it's a need as much as anything. I don't need to listen to music. I need to write music, and that's what I said. I used to get my fill of music really by going to see bands. I do go and see bands fairly regularly, and that's obviously not been possible for a while. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I couldn't even tell you who's in the chart now. I couldn't tell you who's new. I really don't know, and I really don't follow it.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, actually. And there's no one right way to do anything, right? And this gets back to what the themes of what we were talking about, which is you ultimately, when you found peace back in 93, 94 and went through that evolution, it's because you just, you know, kind of let it go, and you being you, and that's an idiosyncratic sound, and it's all worked out really well for you. And fascinating new music. Love the stories. I think it's great. I've taken a lot of your time today, Gary, but it's been a fun journey through your songs and through just the evolution of your life. And so I appreciate the time. It's great to see you, and we'll do it again sometime. This is Peter Csathy from Consequence. And Gary, thanks again for joining us from Los Angeles today. Stay safe during these crazy times, and look forward to seeing you on the road when you kick things off in September.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.